We're going to have Hannah Young, Deputy Consul General for the British Consulate of New York. She is a career diplomat and civil servant for Her Majesty's government, where, full disclosure to my listeners, I also am now an employee as head of communications. So welcome to the Caring Economy, Hannah Young. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning. How are you, Hannah? Can you hear me? Good morning.
Hi.
How are you? Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. How are you? Oh, do you know, we spent, my lighting is awful. There we go. We spent about 10 hours with some very good friends yesterday. And I think I probably drank about 1 bottle of champagne and a couple of gin and tonics. So I woke up and I thought, oh gosh.
Which do you start with, the gin or the champagne?
Sadly, the champagne. So I probably should have stopped there and then not gone on to the gin, but never mind.
You're safe with me. I'm miserable reporting that I had one dry day in January. I wanted to be that person that would take the whole month, but.
Oh dear.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this. I think it's a great way for you to see how it works. And by the way, we're being recorded now. It's all set up on the Zoom, and I will just, producer Rebecca will just edit off the beginning and the end, and anything you or we want to edit in between. It's not a highly sophisticated platform, but it does allow you down to the second to slice and dice. So this is it. It's very straightforward. I record it both audio and visual, but the only thing that goes up on the podcast is the audio. And at least for now, I'm thinking about going onto a YouTube channel as well. And we can talk about that.
Interesting.
Why as well. But I think it's best to walk before we run. So that's how I've taken the Caring Economy. And then what will happen is after this is done, it downloads in a matter of minutes, and I will send you via Anchor, Spotify, the raw audio. And know that we will again edit off the beginning and the end, but if there's anything that you find troubling or you don't want to see the light of day, we will make those edits. But what happened historically in the first 2 seasons, I haven't had any significant edits, and more often than not, my colleagues, because they're friends as well, they just say, you know what, Toby, I trust you. I don't need to even hear the raw footage. Just
Yeah.
And I believe, Hannah, that you also will be able to do the same with our podcast.
Yeah.
For the BCGNY, because it's really about having a relaxed conversation with 2 people. and the listener gets to be the third seat at the table. And that's what makes it special. So I would encourage you to think, as we speak today, as a trial run, about having that third seat at the table. You could have the kitten there, it could be Archie.
I've shut them out.
They may still scratch, right? But it could be Archie or whatever. So, sound good?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. And you got the questions. I love them as well. It won't take long to fill up the hour. I'm still, Anchor Spotify matches podcasts with potential sponsors. So I always build in 2 spots for a break, and you'll know when to do it. And then if it matches, I'll get a sponsor. If they don't, I don't. But don't be surprised. Several times throughout, I'll say, I'll remind listeners that today we're with Hannah Young, who's Deputy Consul General for the British Consulate General of New York. And then I'll say, and now we're just going to take a moment for a break. And then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back with me, Toby Usnick.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's an amazing privilege to test drive with your podcast. I don't know. Let's see how we get on. You'll be the judge of how, how interesting my chat is on this.
Of course, you're so modest. And anytime along the way, if you feel stumbling or awkward, which I don't believe will happen, just say, you know what, can I just restate that? And then I'll just make a note to Rebecca scratch retake from here. And I'll say, and I'll repeat the question. Sound good?
Great.
So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to The Caring Economy with me, Toby Usnick. Today is a particularly special day and guest because I'm having as a guest my new colleague, Hannah Young. Hannah Young is the Deputy Consul General for the British Consul General in New York. She is also now my official colleague because in addition to hosting The Caring Economy, I'm now the head of communications for the British Consulate General in New York. And it's an honor and a privilege to have you here, Hannah Young. So welcome to The Caring Economy.
Thank you, Toby. It's a real privilege to be here.
Hannah, early in my career, I took the Foreign Service exam a few times, the oral exams. I thought that I would begin my career in the Foreign Service. Now I find myself toward the latter part of my career actually in the Foreign Service of sorts, but it's not my own nation, it's Her Majesty's government. So it's thrilling for me, and to get to know you even better makes me feel all the more like I'm coming home. Can you tell us a little bit about your career journey when you were that young person starting out? And in particular, my guests like to hear about the pivots along the way. Why did you choose to go left when others went right? Why did you pick yourself up by the boots and carry on when you could have just said, not my thing?
Well, thank you again for having me. I am probably best described as a career civil servant. So I've been in the civil service for 16 years now. But actually, I think my journey starts when I was about 16 years old and I joined a political party. My parents were quite active, not politically with a capital P, but they were always very encouraging of keeping abreast of current affairs. And I joined a political party and I got quite involved in that. Up until that point, I've been full on trying to pursue an art career. I did an art GCSE. I was going to do my art A-levels. And then something piqued my interest in politics. And instead I changed tack and I went to study government at the London School of Economics, which, as you know, has quite a strong political underpinning to it. And while I was there,
yeah, absolutely,
definitely. And I was encouraged to go and intern for a couple of members of Parliament in Westminster down the road, which I duly did. And then I decided to take it a step further, actually. And in my final year of university, I stood for Parliament, which was an amazing privilege. Yeah. And something that I look back on. And part of me thinks, gosh, the audacity of youth to think that, I could go for that age 21. And another part of me is immensely proud that I did it. And it was a great experience. I was the youngest candidate in the country for that general election. So I got to do both local and national media, and my parents would go out, and my mom would stand in Sainsbury's and tell everybody that they had to vote for her daughter, which I'm sure got me most of the votes that I won in the end.
For our American listeners and international listeners, Sainsbury's is a huge grocery chain in the UK.
That's right, and great stomping ground for collecting activists and supporters. But I stood for Parliament. I didn't win. I wasn't expecting to win, but it was also during my finals year at university, and the university was incredibly supportive. But my degree exams were a week after the election. I scraped a 2-1. And of course, I then missed the milk round. So all of my fellow students had been getting to know all of the different options available to them, including the civil service. And I'd missed all of that. So I was a bit stuck because the party that I had stood for were very keen that I up sticks and move to what they call a target seat, where I might be able to win 5 years later. But age 21, I didn't want to leave the city. So I went to a temping agency and I said, what have you got on your books? I'm interested in politics, ideally the civil service. And I landed this job in the Foreign Office, which I think now is actually pretty much unheard of. It's a very odd route in. And I had an incredible boss called Peter Holland, and he took me from one job to another. I ended up in the Afghan drugs unit, which at the time was the unit focusing on the conflict in Afghanistan at the height of the conflict, I should say. And then I had this opportunity to go out to Afghanistan and actually cover for somebody out there, which turned into a year-long assignment. It was also bizarre because I was still on my temping agency's contract, and I think they had kittens when they had to think about how they were going to handle this temp out in this war zone, as she was faxing timesheets back on a weekly basis.
And were you also wearing battle garb, so to speak?
Yeah, with 2 bodyguards who took me around, the sort of plucky 21, 22-year-old
candidate for Parliament, barely out of university.
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
What does she know? But it was an amazing experience, and I did it for about a year, and I loved it. And then I had the opportunity to go out again on promotion to work for what was then called the Serious Organised Crime Agency, to work with the police out there. And I led a series of Afghan capacity building programs for just over 2 years out there, which was a really challenging moment in my career, not least working with a government that was, still in the height of conflict, and a police force that, was trying to deal with systemic corruption and what have you. But I got to the end of that period and I felt quite burnt out, and I wasn't sure I wanted to stay doing foreign policy. So I then decided to your word, to go for a real pivot into the domestic civil service, where I then joined what was called the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit, at the heart of government. I went from one extreme to another.
Is this transition, you're no longer with the temp agency, you're an employee of the government formally, directly? That's right. So at that point, I was a fully fledged member of the civil service on a slightly more stable contract. And the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit, for people that may not have heard of it, is a bit like an in-house consultancy. So it's a little bit like McKinsey or PwC, where you go into departments to try and diagnose problems that the Prime Minister is concerned about. So it could be, the accident and emergency waiting time has gone up, or it could be, that an infrastructure project is taking a lot longer, and we're sent in to understand what's going on and then report back to the Prime Minister with a series of recommendations to unblock the delivery obstacle.
And that was a really interesting job. I did that for a couple of years and then segued into the Cabinet Office, where I did a series of roles in the national security space, and had two children over the course of that period as well. I took two lots of 12-month breaks, came back, did more national security work, and then Brexit happened. And we were all encouraged to find roles supporting that transition. So I went to the Department for Exiting the EU and headed up a new team called the International Agreements Unit, which was essentially trying to replicate on a bilateral basis all of the agreements that we were going to fall out of when we left the EU. So, you know, everything from the major trade agreements that the EU had with third countries through to very small but important agreements like whiskey agreements and data sharing agreements and, you know, keeping planes in the air flying. Most complicated job I've ever done, cataloguing thousands and thousands of agreements, analysing them for their worth, and then reaching out to third countries to try and replicate them. It was an intellectual challenge beyond anything that I had dealt with before.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, sorry to interrupt, but again, today we have as our guest on the Caring Economy, Hannah Young, who is the Deputy Consul General for the British Consulate General here in New York. Stay with us one moment, and we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back to Hannah. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So welcome back to the Caring Economy with Hannah Young today as our guest from the British Consulate General, where she is Deputy Consul General, and my new colleague is Head of Comms. Hannah, so there you were doing all this major analytical work on policy in a Brexit moment. Where does it go from there, or what was next?
So we're getting there. And apologies, this is taking a long time.
That's fascinating. Please go on.
So I then managed to secure probably a job that would be at the pinnacle of my career so far, which was to move into number 10, to go and be the Prime Minister's private secretary on Home Affairs. And which was a job that I
don't know. Number 10 is 10 Downing Street, the equivalent of the White House for the UK.
That's correct. And the Prime Minister at the time was Theresa May. And I was fortunate to serve her for just over a year. And then Boris Johnson came in and I served him for just under a year. It was a very hard job. I was responsible for all of those thorny policies that prime ministers really don't enjoy talking about because typically things have gone wrong, like counterterrorism or immigration or policing, criminal justice reform. And, you know, all of those are very tricky, politically risky responsibilities. I was very fortunate with Theresa. She'd been the Home Secretary for many years, and in many respects, she knew more about the subject than I did. But, you know, I had to deal with several terrorist attacks during my time there. We had to bring in a new immigration system, design it from scratch when we left the EU. We were suffering from prison capacity that was starting to reach limits.
Was that also when you had the Tower fire? I'm trying to remember.
Grenfell Tower, that was just before my time, but the inquiry was running throughout my time in number 10 as well. And you're right, that was an incredibly tragic moment, and you know, lots of policy changes that fell out of that around building regulation and emergency support in those situations. But it was such a privilege to work in that role. I had coveted that job for many years and had thought about applying for it on a number of different occasions, and it had never quite been the right time. And you know, it was hard. I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old when I started in that job, but it was also just I felt really strongly that I wanted to prove that you can do those kind of jobs when you've got a young family. I really didn't want it to be the kind of job that was off limits to people. And, you know, it was hard. And I obviously needed to get greater support around the house for my kids. You know, we got a nanny to help us. But, you know, I was very clear that I wanted to make it work. I had incredibly supportive bosses who said, when I pitched to them, that I would do things differently and I would try and work a bit more flexibly. You know, they bought that and they understood that and they got behind it. And so, you know, and so I had a very, you know, very challenging but very happy 2 years in that environment. And now I'm here with you in New York, which is...
It's awesome for me. I hope so for you.
Definitely.
I wanted to just chime in on your the leadership, the managers you had at that time when you were raising a young family. It almost seems like you helped them be better prepared for today in a COVID era, right? Because you were juggling it all with Archie's, your husband's support, I'm sure. But that willingness to do as much work or more, and to do it in non-traditional ways or be open to that, I think probably helped you and your colleagues to be just more nimble. And that's one of the things I write about in the Caring Economy and about corporate social responsibility. By working harder to raise the bar and become more responsible to your shareholders, to your employees, to your consumers, you are exercising a muscle that will allow you to be more nimble when the unexpected happens. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And, you know, we've seen that bear out over COVID, as you say, the fact that we have to work more flexibly now. It also, I think, you know, makes your workforce more diverse and more inclusive, doesn't it? Because you're saying that actually, you know, anybody, regardless of their circumstances, can make the job work. And you know, we have the technology now to underpin that in a way that we, you know, perhaps didn't have 10, 15, 20 years ago. So there really is no excuse now for not being able to offer that kind of flexibility to individuals. I mean, it obviously works both ways. You know, I was very conscious in number 10 that when the phone rang in the middle of the night and something had happened, I'd have to drop everything. And that happened. You know, I remember there was one occasion on a Sunday afternoon, we were literally about to walk out the door to take my children swimming, and the phone rang and it was a terrorist attack. And I had to turn around and say to my kids, I'm really sorry, but we can't go swimming now. I've got to go into work and, you know, I'm not sure when I'll be back, but Daddy's here and he'll look after you.
Wow. That's astonishing. I can't wait to read your memoir one day. Ladies and gentlemen, again, today we have on the Caring Economy, Hannah Young, who is the Deputy Consul General at the British Consul General here in New York, where I also, as of the start of the new year, joined as Head of Communications. Hannah, can you tell us, as a woman in the civil service, having worked in these amazing assignments, what might you want men to know about gender in the workplace?
It's a really good question, and I'm really glad that you've asked that question, because actually I think more men should be asking that on a regular basis. I've had the benefit of some amazingly supportive men over my career, particularly during those transition moments, you know, either moving into a new role or getting a promotion, or coming back from maternity leave. I remember Kim Darroch, who you may also recall as the ambassador out here for a period of time to the United States. When I came back from maternity leave the first time around, I didn't have a role to come back into. And I remember calling him up and saying to him, you know, I really want to make my time away from my kids count. I really want to do a job that is meaningful and that is important to you. He was the national security advisor at the time, and you know, he brought me back, and he put me in a team responsible for the UK's response to the Russia-Ukraine crisis that was kicking off at the time.
Wow, you have just done
I
so
know,
many
I know.
things.
Out of the frying pan into the fire. I don't, you know, maybe I should have gone back and just done the whole nappy changing. It might have been a bit easier, but you know, it was really important. And likewise, actually, I had another great male boss who promoted me into the senior ranks, despite the fact that I was 4.5 months pregnant, and he knew I was going to go off very soon, you know, for a 12-month break. And, you know, obviously we shouldn't be discriminating against women who are pregnant, but it happens.
Yes.
Sadly, and so, you know, I've had some amazingly supportive men. I've also suffered, you know, as a result of sexism, and so, you know, I think there's something about giving women a voice. You know, when you look at the table, when you walk into a room, I've been in those situations where, you know, the majority of men have been sitting at the table and the majority of women have been in more junior roles sitting around the side. And I think there's something about inviting women to the table when they're not proactively wanting to sit there. And, you know, I think there's, in that kind of scenario, there's also the whole concept of stolen ideas. You know, I've sat in meetings with very senior men who, you know, I'm sitting there and thinking, you've just made the same point that somebody else has made. I'm not gonna make that point now. Or, you know, you've just taken my idea. And there's something about calling that behavior out and, you know, acknowledging when a woman has a good idea and, you know, is putting it forward, you know, encouraging women to have a voice in the room. I think there's something about proactively valuing female counterparts. You know, women are given less credit for tasks, I think, and women also give themselves less credit. And that can sometimes create a downward spiral in terms of your confidence levels.
Yeah, I want to poke at that a little bit. It's been my observation that sometimes women are their own worst, are other women's worst enemies in workplaces. It's as if, and it's not as a gay man, I've seen this with gay people as well. Once one rises up, how do they treat their peers? Do they leave them behind? Do they try and help lift them up as well as lifting up other people? I don't think it's about favoritism. I think it is trying to get as diverse a representation in an organization and lifting everyone up. But have you found that some of the misogynist is not the word I would want, but some of the difficulties rising as a woman in your career has been also slowed by other women?
It's a really interesting question. I wouldn't say slowed, but I think that sometimes there can be a tendency for women to overemphasize the kind of male qualities that we think are, you know, the epitome of the best kind of leadership. That's the challenge. It's how you stay, you know, how you stay unique to you, how you stay true to yourself as you become more senior. You know, when you're in a room full of men, of course, sometimes you have to lean in and be a little bit more, I don't know, elbows out than you might otherwise feel. But I think, you know, staying true to yourself is really important. And I think that's where, you know, women can really help other women and provide that space as they become more senior, to allow you to be yourself, but also to have the confidence that, you know, your voice is going to be heard, and, you know, to sort of champion putting women forward in that way. I mean, sorry, Toby.
No, please.
I was going to say the other area that I feel very strongly about is, and we touched on it, but, you know, making it work for parents. And actually, that's not just women. You know, that's women and men. You know, giving those opportunities, and I think, you know, to the amazing response of Kim Darroch, you know, on my phone call to him, not just assuming that women don't want the difficult jobs when they're having those transition moments. You know, particularly coming back from maternity leave, because I think, you know, that's where we see the gender gap at the most acute.
Divide, yes.
Exactly. And so, you know, those moments, honing in on really supporting women in that transition back to work, or any carer, for that matter, because it's obviously now not just women who bring up children, thank goodness.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you a little bit about the private sector, because we're working in government, but it's my belief, as I've written in the book, that we need all hands on deck for these major issues of our times, whether it's COVID or diversity and inclusion and Black Lives Matter or climate, which we'll come to in a bit. So what has been your take on the role of the private sector in creating a better tomorrow? And what does success look like?
So the private sector is absolutely a force for good. And I've had the privilege of being in the middle of the Venn diagram between the private sector and the public sector, where, actually we're making policies, but ultimately they're being implemented by the private sector. When I was in Afghanistan, we very much relied on private sector support, both in terms of keeping us safe, to my comment about my 2 bodyguards, also through to supporting us in rolling out the right kit for Afghans, helping provide the training to, capacity build them. When I've been working in the criminal justice world, a lot of our prisons are run by the private sector. It's a really, really hard job. And yet the private sector has exactly stepped in at the cutting edge of cyber and national security, as we think about how we can support businesses and individuals staying safer. A lot of the technology at the cutting edge of that is the private sector supporting the public sector in what it's trying to achieve. And I think the beauty of having that partnership is that, I think sometimes the private sector just has the ability to innovate and take risks that we might not be able to do in the public sector. Partly because we have a different framework. We have a more political framework, for example, and that provides the parameters for what we can and can't do. But when you collaborate with the private sector, certainly in my experience, there is just a different ability to flex and innovate. And as you said, Toby, when you look at COVID at the moment, my God, we've really had to rely on the private sector to help us understand how to get through this, to develop the vaccine, to help distribute it. And that feels like the sharp end of the relationship between the two.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, again today on The Caring Economy, we have Hannah Young. She's the Deputy Consul General at the British Consulate General here in New York, also my new employer. We're going to take a quick break and be right back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hannah, when you talk about the private sector, I wonder if you've got any sort of favorite stories or an example. I agree with your assessment of broad categories from tech and pharma stepping up to the plate. I also agree with you that business largely is a force for good. And it does dovetail with our mission at Her Majesty's government to present the UK as a force for good. But there are some bad actors out there, right? They're purely profit driven, not purposeful. I'm not going to single any out. I have some that I have in the past, but do you have any favorites that you've personally worked with in terms of great brands?
Oh gosh, it's a tricky one actually, and I feel like maybe we should have this conversation in 6 months' time, because I think in the role here in New York, we're very much facing out to the private sector, and particularly in the world of arts and culture, but also in trade, climate.
Practice. I'm going to as I think through it, I'm going to cut, Rebecca, we're going to cut and start back from the last break, and we'll skip this question and go right into climate. Is that all right?
It's quite difficult because all of my jobs have been on the sort of the trickier side. So I can tell you when G4S, really screwed up prisons.
No.
But
I don't want to, too soon we're going to go there. But note to Rebecca, we're going to restart here from the second sponsor break. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Caring Economy with today's guest, Hannah Young, the Deputy Consul General at the British Consul General here in New York. Hannah, I know climate is also very near and dear to your heart, as well as your husband, Archie's. Tell us a little bit about that. How do you stay inspired? How do you build the campaign, so to speak, or the movement to a better tomorrow?
Climate is, I think, the biggest existential challenge that we face as societies, as individuals. And it really scares me when I think about the world that my children are going to inherit. Mm-hmm. And I worry about their health. I worry about the natural habitat. I worry that they won't have the opportunity to travel and to see some amazing places. Mm-hmm. I worry about food supply chains. And I think if I look at the roles that I've had over the years in the civil service, of course, decisions have consequences, and you don't take your responsibilities lightly, particularly when you work on, topics like national security. But actually, there's a political cycle, and every 4 years a new government comes in, and they might change gear and shift, and that's generally okay. Mm-hmm. And yet when it comes to climate, actually these decisions really matter, and they really matter now because the time is running out, and it's not just a case of trying something and seeing if it works, and if it doesn't work, pivoting away from it. Actually we need to take action now. It's also fascinating and scary and challenging to think how we do that, because again, it's a topic that affects everybody. Mm-hmm. Everyone has to play their part, mm-hmm. from every single country in the world setting more ambitious net zero targets, mm-hmm. through to businesses having their own approaches, to sustainability, through to individuals making lifestyle choices that they may not like, mm-hmm. but that will ultimately contribute to, the world trying to slow global warming. So it's a subject that I care about, both from a professional and a personal perspective. Mm-hmm.
What are the initiatives that are ongoing? I'm sort of still getting up to speed here, but I know we do a lot around just awareness raising with panel discussions, partnerships, collaborations. COP is being hosted this year by Her Majesty's government, which is a huge opportunity in November to really help catalyze that change. What are some of the things you're working on now?
Yeah, so there's an overarching objective, and COP26 is a catalyst, but it's by no means the.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. You're saying COP26 is the catalyst.
The end to this.
Yes.
The overarching. So first off, we need everybody to be more ambitious in their commitments to net zero, and as I mentioned, that's right from countries down to the sub-national level, to businesses, even to individuals. So committing more ambitious net zero plans is really important. In New York, at the consulate, we're also focusing on finance, and we call it greening the finance and financing the green. Mm-hmm. So we want financial institutions to invest in greener solutions, but we also want them to be leaders in their own right in their ESG commitments, in their net zero plans. So we're focusing very much on supporting those more ambitious commitments, supporting more transparent reporting of where the money flows go, because actually what we're finding is that investors are now asking the questions themselves and wanting to see how green portfolios are before they make decisions about where their money goes. So that's a big focus. And then we're also looking at other projects like transportation, zero emissions vehicles. The UK quite recently announced that we were going to stop selling new internal combustion engines by 2030. And we're very keen to support other countries and states, including here in the US, to make similar commitments.
Actually, this week, GM has announced that they're going that direction, and it sort of shocked the rest of the auto industry here in the States. So it's exciting, right? It's starting to happen.
It is exciting. And actually, to one of your earlier questions about the relationship between the private sector and government, zero emissions vehicles is a really interesting one, where it feels like industry and government has played cat and mouse for the last 10 years, where government has set a slightly more ambitious bar, and then industry have innovated and managed to meet that. And that has then allowed government to bring forward the level of ambition. And again, industry, catching up. And it's a really interesting case study in the relationship between the two, for the greater good. I suppose my only other thought on climate change, and it's something that our Prime Minister has talked about a lot recently, is it's not just important for the environment. It actually makes economic sense to be investing in this space. The train is leaving the station, and coal is not going to be the thing to invest in for much longer. It's going to be green technologies. It's going to be green wind energy, solar panels, and so it's encouraging people to understand that actually this isn't really a choice anymore. And how can we support you make that transition in a way that is just, and in a way that continues to give people the livelihoods that they need, but also recognizes that they do need to make that shift, and they need to do that sooner rather than later.
It becomes a competitive advantage. It also becomes a much more compelling draw for young recruits, for investors, and for consumers. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a privilege today to have Hannah Young on the Caring Economy. She is the Deputy Consul General in New York, and she's, what's your hashtag or your Twitter handle for those who want to follow you, Hannah?
Oh my God, Toby, you're going to have to ask me that again in a second.
We'll do it right now, I can tell you. So we'll ask that again.
That is awful, Toby.
No, I want you to get a following. That's the whole. So
no, you do. But how do I not know this?
Well, we're going to find out.
Because I don't ever see it.
I think it's. I think here it is. It's Hannah Young NYC, I believe.
NYC. Yeah. You're right. So, it's because I've got a private one as well.
3, 2, 1. So Hannah, for our friends and followers who want to know more about you, the Consul General, and its efforts, all these things we've discussed about today, what's your Twitter handle?
It's Hannah Young NYC.
That's Hannah Young NYC. I would encourage all of you to follow this meteoric rise of my colleague Hannah Young. I'm going to let you have the last word today here on the Caring Economy. Hannah Young, what say you about the future, and what gives you hope or inspiration? Or you can talk about the role of service. Your word.
Well, thank you, Toby, and thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a great privilege. I think people just need to challenge themselves on what they can do to support the environment. As I said, it's something that we all have a responsibility for, and we all benefit from it on a daily basis. So I just want to really encourage your listeners to think about what they can do personally and professionally to support this effort, because it really is a team effort.
Awesome. Thank you again, Hannah Young, Deputy Consul General from Her Majesty's Government, the Consul General. Sorry, Rebecca Scratches. Thank you again, Hannah Young. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for my guest today, Hannah Young, Deputy Consul General for the Consulate General here in New York, Her Majesty's Government represented in our own patch. Have a great day. Okay, now
Thank
I will
you.
stop